Hello and welcome to the Mysteries of History podcast with me, your host, Nick Monk. Each week together we will take a look at a fascinating piece of history. As gruesome, mysterious, unbelievable that these tales may sound, one thing is for sure. These events happened, these people existed, and these places have made their mark on our historical landscape. Be sure to check out the website, themysteriesofhistory.com, where you can access all of the podcasts and show notes. And of course the blog, where we will give you an extra insight into each episode, as well as all sorts of unbelievable historical content. You can also find us on social media, where you can let us know what you think of the podcast episodes, or even suggest a new historical mystery for us to investigate. And now you can even support the show. Follow the link on the website or our Instagram page and donate any amount that you may wish to help us to keep this great podcast going. Any donations are much appreciated. But don't worry, we'll keep going anyway. We love a historical mystery far too much to stop anytime soon. So now, let's take a look at this week's mysterious historical tale. An island in northern Europe, rich in natural minerals and resources, has been invaded, conquered, and plundered by the Roman Empire. However, by 400 AD, Rome must turn its attention south to mainland Europe and the heart of the empire itself. Barbarians threaten the very heart of the empire. Germanic tribes are increasingly attacking key strategic points. The army is stretched thin. By 410 AD, the Roman army, the imperial war machine, has withdrawn from Britannia altogether. A new people begin to arrive in Britain, the Anglo-Saxons. After the Romans finally left Britannia in 410 AD, the Anglo-Saxons began to arrive in ships across the North Sea. The Anglo-Saxon age in Britain is regarded as being from about 410 AD until the year 1066, when William the Bastard of Normandy invaded the island of Britannia and claimed the English crown for himself, defeating King Harold, the last king of the Anglo-Saxons, at the Battle of Hastings, and ending over 600 years of Anglo-Saxon rule in Britain. The Anglo-Saxon period is often known as the Dark Ages, mostly because written sources for the early years of Saxon invasion are very scarce indeed. However, historians also give this period the name the Early Middle Ages, or early medieval period. Interestingly, it is often thought that climate change had an influence on the movement of the Anglo-Saxon people into Britain in the centuries after 400 AD, when Europe's average temperature was 1 degree Celsius warmer than today. In Britain, grapes could be grown as far north as Tyneside. And for the benefit of our international listeners, that is not far south of the Scottish border. Warmer summers meant that crops grew well, and a rise in population resulted in the countries of northern Europe. At the same time, melting polar ice caused more flooding in low-lying areas, particularly in areas that are now known as the countries of Denmark, Holland and Belgium. The people in these regions eventually began looking for lands elsewhere to settle and raise their children. Britain was left as a defenceless and inviting prospect. So when we talk about Anglo-Saxons, we're talking about different groups of people from various different countries as we would know them now. So the Saxons were mostly German Dutch, the Angles were southern Danish, and the Jutes were from northern Denmark. And these people arrived in Britain over a number of decades. So as they arrived in Britain, the Anglo-Saxon groups settled in different areas of the country. And these areas, these congregations of people, formed several kingdoms eventually. And these kingdoms were constantly at war with one another. And the kingdoms sometimes acknowledged one of their rulers as a high king, the Bretwalda. And by 650 AD, there were 7 separate kingdoms in Britain, as follows. So in what we know as the county of Kent, in the eastern part of Britain, this area was settled by the Jutes, and Ethelbert of Kent was the first Anglo-Saxon king to be converted to Christianity by St. Augustine in about 595 AD. Mercia, the central part of Britain, where you would find Birmingham as a central point now, the city of Birmingham. So Mercia, which is often best known for its ruler Offa, who built Offa's Dyke, which was essentially a bank and ditch formation along the border between Wales and England. And this large kingdom stretched all over the Midlands, perhaps the largest of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, a very powerful region. In Northumbria, made famous by Venerable Bede. Bede was a monk who lived from about 670 AD to 735 AD. So he lived and wrote his Ecclesiastical History of Britain. The Ecclesiastical History of Britain is a really important source of information for historians, as there aren't many written texts from this period. It's why it's often known as the Dark Ages, as I described before. So Bede's work is particularly important, and Northumbria is the northernmost Anglo-Saxon territory, if you like, and it borders Scotland. Down in the southeast of England, you have East Anglia, the region of East Anglia, and this is where the Angles settled. The North folk living in what we would term as modern Norfolk, the county of Norfolk, and the South folk lived in the county of Suffolk. Now, a really famous archaeological find from this region is the Sutton Hoo ship burial, which was found in East Anglia in 1939. Now, the Sutton Hoo ship burial is of such vital importance for our understanding of the Anglo-Saxon period, because the Sutton Hoo ship burial is the burial site of an Anglo-Saxon king. The king was buried ceremoniously within the ship and surrounded by very rich grave goods, so lots of gold and intricately carved objects, really incredibly well made. I'll put some links to some images of the Sutton Hoo ship burial on the on social media and the website blog for you to have a look at. It's really worth taking the time, because it really shows how advanced the Anglo-Saxons were in terms of metalworking at this very early period in British history. So another one of the regions that the Anglo-Saxons settled in was in what we now know as the county of Essex. Now, this region was settled by the East Saxons, and it was here that the very famous Battle of Maldon occurred in the year 991 AD. And I'll tell you a little bit more about what was going on during this time period in a minute. Another region was the county of Sussex, and this is where the South Saxons settled. And finally, in the southwest of England, covering the counties of, well, really sort of Hampshire, Wiltshire, Dorset, Somerset, all the way through across into Devon, is the Anglo-Saxon region of Wessex. Wessex was a very powerful region during Anglo-Saxon times. And this was settled by the West Saxons, and later became the kingdom of King Alfred. And King Alfred is somebody that we are going to talk about very shortly. And he is the only English king ever to have been called the Great King Alfred, or Alfred the Great. And his grandson is also very famous, Athelstan, who's getting a lot of media coverage at the present time, actually, because he is regarded as the first king of the English, so of all England. But we're going to discuss all of this in a minute. But what I've just tried to do is just give you an idea of how England itself was broken up into these warring kingdoms of various Anglo-Saxon tribes, to suggest that the Anglo-Saxons all came across the North Sea together and got on harmoniously is very far from the truth. They were constantly warring with each other, and you have to imagine that each region, as I've mentioned, would have had its own ruler, its own king. So there was lots of bargaining, treachery, all sorts going on during this time period. And indeed, by 850 AD, the 7 kingdoms that I've just mentioned, the 7 regions of England, had been consolidated into 3 large Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, namely Northumbria to the north, Mercia in the centre of England, and Wessex to the south and west of England. And it is at this point that the Anglo-Saxons really became what we would call a Christian nation. So Christianity was in its very early stages at this time period. And as we've discussed, the Anglo-Saxons were a mix of tribes from what we now call countries such as Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands, the Holland. The 3 biggest tribes were the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes. And interestingly, the land they settled became known as Angleland, or England, as we now call it. So that's quite interesting to understand where the country name for England comes from. It comes from the name Angleland, which is Saxon. And of course, the Anglo-Saxons brought with them various Germanic languages and new customs and a new dress, very different from the Roman Empire. The Romans had a very different style to the Anglo-Saxons. So now we have an idea of the people, where they came from, and how the country of England was divided, and divided is the important word during this time period. So now we're going to focus on the kingdom of Wessex, and in particular we're going to focus on King Alfred the Great. King Alfred, who was later to become known as King Alfred the Great, was a pivotal figure in early English history and is renowned for his exceptional leadership during a really tumultuous period marked by relentless Viking invasions that threatened the very fabric of Anglo-Saxon society. His reign from 871 to 899 AD was characterised not only by remarkable military prowess, but also by a profound commitment to education, legal reform, and the promotion of the Christian faith. So what we're going to do here is have a look at the life of King Alfred and examine his innovative strategies against the Viking incursions, the socio-political landscape of his time, and the lasting impact of his victories and formation of a unified England, which would go on to influence future generations. The late 8th and early 9th centuries in Britain were a time of significant upheaval, as the Viking Age unfolded dramatically across the British Isles. Now, this era was marked by Norse explorations and raids, with Scandinavian warriors targeting the British Isles for both plunder and settlement. The initial Viking raids began in the late 700s. In fact, the first Viking raid into Britain probably took place in either 787 or 789 AD. Now, we have this information thanks to King Alfred, because he commissioned a set of papers which formed a book, if you like, called the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. Now, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle is essentially a compilation of annals telling the history of the Wessex dynasty, and it really reveals the trials and tribulations of kingship and the development of Christianity, Anglo-Saxon culture, and so much more during this time period. And as a primary historical resource, it's invaluable for us. It's like I said, it's one of the few sources or direct sources of information we have from the Anglo-Saxon period, along with Bede's ecclesiastical history of the British people. It was originally compiled in the 9th century during the reign of King Alfred, and its original manuscript was intended to be a national chronicle or record, if you like, of events, giving a detailed yearly account of English history. So, this really demonstrates how invaluable this information is to us today. Interestingly, by the year 890 AD, multiple copies of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle had been produced and were in circulation, and these were often housed in monasteries around the country. So these manuscripts, these variations of the Chronicle, were often changed, if you like, somewhat, or enhanced and supplemented by each individual monastery. And this led to variations of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, but obviously the original still existed as well. And in total there were 9 manuscripts written, whilst the last one also provided a translation into Latin as well. Now today there are 7 surviving manuscripts, along with bits which are housed predominantly in the British Library, as well as at Corpus Christi College in Cambridge and the Bodleian Library in Oxford. So they really are incredible resources to have existed for all these hundreds of years, and to have them housed now safely is just amazing, really. So going back to the very first Viking raid into England, or Anglo-Saxon England, in either 787 or 789 AD, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle for the year 787 says the following: "This year King Bertric took to wife Idburga, King Offa's daughter, and in his days first came 3 ships of Northmen out of Hethraland," which is Denmark, "and then the reeve rode to the place and would have driven them to the king's town, because he knew not who they were, and there they slew him. These were the first ships of Danishmen who sought the land of the English nation." So if you're wondering what a reeve is, I say, and then the reeve rode to the place. A reeve is, or was, a medieval bailiff. So the poor old bailiff has unwittingly taken the invading Danish Vikings to where the king was. The reivers lost his life, and the local population were no doubt slaughtered and plundered on a scale that the Anglo-Saxons were probably not used to. One of the most infamous attacks on British soil during this time period was the Viking raid on the holy island of Lindisfarne in the year 793 AD. So on the 8th of June in the year 793 AD, the monastery on Lindisfarne, on the island of Lindisfarne, which is off the north coast of Northumbria, was attacked. The Vikings seemingly arrived in swift, shallow draft longships, which was a testament to their seafaring prowess. And Saxon writers at the time in northern England wrote about how they could foretell that danger and disaster were imminent. They believed that they could see bad omens in the weather, and they describe how they saw immense whirlwinds, flashes of lightning, and fiery dragons were seen flying in the air. So they thought that these aerial phenomena, in other words, thunder and lightning no doubt, foretold of dark times to come. So indeed there was a famine soon after this, these events, the thunder and lightning that the Saxon writers are talking about. But as I've just described, on the 8th of June, the Vikings come along, and again the Saxon writers say, heathen men came and miserably destroyed God's church on Lindisfarne with plunder and slaughter. The attack was completely out of the blue, and many of the monks at the monastery of Lindisfarne lost their lives in a very violent manner. The Vikings plundered the monastery of all its treasures. Monasteries held many treasures, gold, silver, all sorts, and indeed they took some of the monks' slaves. And it's actually the first major recorded Viking raid in Britain, and it's often cited as the beginning of the Viking Age in England. And it did send shockwaves through the very Christian world at the time. The Vikings were regarded as, well, if you were non-Christian, as heathens. And, to desecrate a holy place like a monastery was a very significant event. And it was the ferocity against, holy people that really shocked the Anglo-Saxon world. And the attackers, like I said, committed extreme violence, and I think it's the levels of violence that really shocked the Anglo-Saxon people. They stole religious artifacts, as I've said, and some monks were even drowned off the island as well, and the church was just left bare, stripped of all its treasures. And so, as the Viking forces grew increasingly bold and organised, they began to establish footholds in England, leading to the fragmentation of a once cohesive Anglo-Saxon world, a set of kingdoms. And the kingdoms, the Anglo-Saxon people, struggled to respond effectively to the Viking incursion. Now, this backdrop of chaos and fear sets the stage for King Alfred's rise to power and his subsequent efforts to restore stability and unity to his realm. Alfred was born in 849 AD, the youngest son of King Aethelwulf of Wessex, into a royal lineage that was already familiar with the challenges posed by Viking incursions. His early life was marked by the shadow of these persistent threats, and his education was heavily influenced by the need for effective and strategic leadership in a time of crisis. After the death of his brothers, who fell in battle against the Danes, Alfred ascended to the throne in 871 AD, inheriting a kingdom besieged by Viking forces. Alfred's ascension to the throne came at a critical juncture where the survival of Wessex itself and the preservation of Anglo-Saxon culture depended on his ability to rally his people and forge a path towards resistance and eventual victory. Alfred's early reign was fraught with challenges that tested his leadership skills and resolve. The Vikings had already captured significant territories, and the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were in disarray. with many regions succumbing to Viking control. Alfred faced a series of arduous battles against the Danes, including the pivotal Battle of Ashdown, where he achieved a crucial victory that bolstered the morale of his troops and his subjects alike. However, the struggle was far from over, as the Viking threat remained potent, necessitating a multifaceted approach to warfare and defence. Recognising the urgent need for a robust defence, Alfred implemented a series of fortifications known as burhs. These were fortified towns protected by a bank and ditch arrangement, serving not only as military hubs but also as centres of administration and trade, allowing for rapid mobilisation of forces against Viking raids. The strategic placement of these burhs across Wessex created an extensive network that enhanced communication and defence, ensuring that local militias could respond quickly to Viking incursions. This innovative approach to urban planning and military strategy reflected Alfred's understanding of the importance of infrastructure in warfare. In addition to traditional military tactics, Alfred adapted his strategies to incorporate guerrilla warfare principles. Rather than engaging in direct confrontations with the numerically superior Viking forces, he employed hit-and-run tactics, leveraging the element of surprise to disrupt Viking operations. This approach not only demoralised Viking forces, but also allowed Alfred to gradually reclaim lost territories, undermining the Viking hold on England through a series of calculated and decisive strikes. This foresight and military prowess would serve Alfred well, for the very heart of his kingdom would soon come under threat, and he would come face to face with one of the great Viking warlords. Guthrum, or Guthrum the Old as he was also known, was the leader of a major Danish invasion of Anglo-Saxon England in 865 AD. He is recorded in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, appearing as the head of the Great Summer Army as it was known, who joined forces with the great heathen host in East Anglia in 871 AD. The year of Alfred the Great's ascension to the throne in Wessex, and also known as the Year of Battles. Guthrum's army ravaged southern England between Reading and Cambridge for over the next 2 years, before heading north and spending the winter of 873 AD at Repton, just south of Derby, where he built an extensive D-shaped defensive structure. They also had to dig a mass grave for over 200 of their warriors, who died there of disease. In the year 874, the Mercian king Burgred was defeated, and Guthrum took his army back to Cambridge and into East Anglia. It is at this point that Guthrum turned his attention towards the west. He had his eyes set firmly on one of the biggest prizes, the kingdom of Wessex. And so in the year 876 AD, he moved into Alfred's territory and Wessex itself, taking up headquarters in Wareham on the Dorset coast. The fighting this year was indecisive, with Guthrum eventually swearing an oath on his golden arm ring to uphold a peace with Alfred. It would seem, though, that words were cheap, and Guthrum soon broke the treaty, with his men marching first to Exeter in the southwest, and then back into Mercia, spending the winter of 877 in Gloucester. On the night of the 5th and 6th of January 878 AD, things take a dramatic turn, and the Viking Danish army, led by Guthrum the Old, launched a surprise attack on King Alfred's winter court at Chippenham in Wiltshire, quickly overcoming Alfred and his men and forcing him to flee for his life with his family and a small entourage into the wetlands of Somerset. Anglo-Saxon England was on its knees and was reduced to defending an Iron Age marsh fort on the Isle of Athelney in Somerset. King Alfred of Wessex found himself in a perilous situation. He needed fighting men, and he needed fighting men fast. Isolated in the boggy marshes of the Somerset levels, he dispatched riders, sending them on a perilous and dangerous journey through Viking-occupied Wessex. Their task was simple: contact Alfred's ealdormen. These were the officials of his shires, the regions of Wessex, ruled by appointed but most importantly trustworthy men who could raise the feuds of Somerset, Wiltshire and East Hampshire, with instructions to gather an army at Egbert Stone on the border of Somerset and Wiltshire at the beginning of May 878 AD. The feud was the principal military force in Anglo-Saxon England and was a clever system where free men and villagers could be called to service by the king or the local lords or ealdormen, often for a limited period of time. This was an excellent system in Anglo-Saxon Britain because it required an army as and when, and did not need paid men at service at all times. However, the feud were expected to pay for their provisions, and most importantly, arm themselves. You could almost think of a feud as a territorial or part-time military force, as exists here in the UK, or for example in the United States. You could compare them to something like the National Guard, a military force that could be called upon in times of need, but at other times stood down. On the Isle of Athelney, surrounded by marshland, King Alfred bided his time. He planned a counter-offensive against Guthrum the Old, but needed to be sure that he had the might and the force to take him on. Eventually, after nearly 6 months in the marshland areas of Somerset, King Alfred made his way out using withy boats and hidden tracks, moving along an old Roman road through the towns of Somerton to Bruton and headed north to Egbert Stone. Here he famously stood on King's Hill and awaited the arrival of his ealdormen and the Anglo-Saxon army. And the ealdormen proved as loyal as ever and brought along with them the feud, the great Anglo-Saxon army, an army now capable of taking on the might of the Danish Viking army, led by the fearsome and battle-hardened Guthrum the Old. Sometime between the 6th and the 12th of May in the year 878 AD, Alfred the Great, the King of Wessex, clashed with Guthrum the Old, the Danish Viking warlord, who was hell-bent on claiming Wessex for himself. The two armies met at Ethandun outside the walls of the fortress at Chippenham in the county of Wiltshire. Alfred's soldiers fought on foot and confronted the Danes with a dense Anglo-Saxon shield wall, a mighty defence for any foe, and something that Guthrum would struggle to break. Alfred did not have it his own way though. He suffered initial setbacks, but was able to regroup his forces and adopt a more strategic approach. He utilised his knowledge of the local terrain and employed effective military tactics, engaging Guthrum's forces in a fierce battle that ultimately turned the tide in favour of the Anglo-Saxons. The battle was marked by intense fighting, but Alfred's forces, bolstered by the morale of their previous victories and the support of local militias, managed to rout Guthrum's army. The defeat was catastrophic for the Vikings, leading to a significant loss in manpower and resources, and forcing Guthrum to retreat. We are fortunate to have a contemporary account of this battle from the Welsh monk Asa, who later became bishop of the nearby town of Sherborne in Dorset. He was a learned man who Alfred integrated into his royal court in 885 AD. In the words of Asa, Alfred overthrew the pagans with great slaughter, and smiting the fugitives, he pursued them as far as the fortress. Following his defeat at Ethandun, Guthrum was compelled to seek peace. And as part of that surrender agreement, Guthrum committed that he and 30 of his senior warriors would convert to Christianity. This was a hugely significant event, as no longer would these warriors from the north be viewed as pagans, but now they would be following the one true religion of Christianity in the eyes of the Anglo-Saxon population. Guthrum and his defeated Danes moved to the village of Wedmore in Somerset, where they spent the summer in relative peace, whilst Alfred and Guthrum agreed upon the terms of what would become known as the Treaty of Wedmore. This formalised the surrender of the Danish army and granted land to the Vikings in East Anglia, where they could live in peace. This was a significant event in early British history, as it led to the formation of what was known as the Danelaw, which made the Norse presence in England permanent. The Danelaw meant that the Vikings could live in peace, and Danish laws applied here. This system existed from the late 9th century all the way up until the Norman conquest of 1066. The Danelaw included most of East Anglia and much of the Midlands and northern England. And so in order to fulfil his terms of surrender, in early June 878 AD, Guthrum, who was sponsored by Alfred as his godfather, came to the small church in the village of Aller in South Somerset, near to Athelney, and was baptised along with 30 of his followers. This single moment could be earmarked as the point at when England became unified and Christian. Guthrum became a free man and ruled in East Anglia as King of the East Angles from about 879 AD up until his death in around 890 AD. Guthrum, after converting to Christianity, adopted the baptismal name of Athelstan. The defeat of Guthrum had far-reaching consequences for the Viking presence in England. While the Vikings continued to raid other parts of Britain, their ability to establish permanent settlements in Wessex was severely diminished. Alfred's victory not only safeguarded his kingdom, but also inspired other Anglo-Saxon leaders to resist Viking encroachments, leading to a gradual decline in Viking power in the region. The Treaty of Wedmore also facilitated the integration of Viking settlers into Anglo-Saxon society, contributing to the cultural and social evolution of England. The conversion of Guthrum and his followers to Christianity played a crucial role in this process, fostering a sense of shared identity and culture between the Anglo-Saxons and the Danes. Alfred never forgot the key role that Athelney played in his success over the Danish Viking Hoard. This remote island, surrounded by almost impenetrable marshy and boggy landscapes, allowed Alfred time to regroup and strengthen his forces. Alfred fortified the nearby settlement of East Lynn by creating a burh. Simply put, this is an Anglo-Saxon bank and ditch arrangement around the settlement itself. This demonstrated Alfred's commitment to protecting the local Anglo-Saxon population from any further Viking incursions. But Alfred's gratitude to the people of this beautiful part of Somerset did not cease here. At the island of Athelney, he founded Athelney Abbey. This was to become a centre of learning, spirituality and devotion. Monks dedicated their time to meticulously and intricately copying manuscripts, which have allowed future generations to access contemporary accounts and knowledge that would otherwise have been lost for all time. The establishment of Athelney Abbey was a demonstration of Alfred's devotion to religion, but also to the advancement of education. Alfred knew that it was critical to revive education and literacy in his kingdom, recognising that a well-informed populace was crucial for the long-term stability and prosperity of his realm. He was a visionary. He invited scholars from across Europe to Wessex, translating key texts into Old English and promoting the study of the scriptures. His efforts led to a cultural renaissance that would influence generations to come, as the revival of learning sparked interest in literature, philosophy, and the sciences. By fostering an environment that valued knowledge and education, Alfred laid the intellectual foundations for the future of England itself. In addition to his educational reforms, Alfred implemented a series of legal codes that emphasised justice and morality, reflecting his desire to create a fair and orderly society. His laws, known as the Dooms, sought to unify the diverse Anglo-Saxon laws of the different kingdoms into a coherent system, promoting stability and order in his realm. These legal reforms not only addressed contemporary issues, but also established principles of justice that would resonate throughout English history, influencing the development of common law and the legal system in subsequent centuries. King Athelstan, who was king of the Anglo-Saxons from 924 to 927 AD, and king of the English from 927 until 939 when he died, was the grandson of King Alfred, and is somebody who is prominent in the media at the moment as being the true first king of all of the English realm, of England itself. However, there can be no doubt that King Alfred the Great's efforts in education, law and governance had a profound impact on the development of English identity and being responsible for laying the foundations for a unified England. Today in 2025, in an era where England and the English themselves appear to be struggling with their identity, never has it been a more important time for its people to truly understand the rich and diverse history of their forefathers. From the very beginning of the colonisation of this island nation by the hunter-gatherers Homo antecessor, a human species that lived some 950,000 years ago, to the settlement of pagan tribes in the Neolithic onward, invasions by the Roman Empire and the people of Middle Europe in the Anglo-Saxon period, the Viking Northmen, the Norman conquest from France in 1066, all the way through to the Windrush generation of the West Indies in the middle 20th century, and immigration from the Far East. England today is a true mix of cultures and people to be celebrated. And if not already obvious to those of us that reside here, it is clear that we are all immigrants to this unique island located between the Atlantic Ocean and continental Europe. And what of Alfred himself? The legacy and impact of the rule of Alfred the Great of Wessex is undeniable, but it may surprise you to know that the final resting place of this mighty Anglo-Saxon king is today disputed and largely unknown. This truly is a mystery of history. Of course, over 1,000 years of English history has passed since Alfred's death in October 899 AD, where Alfred most likely succumbed to Crohn's disease, whereby the gut becomes inflamed, or possibly a cancer of his abdominal area. Alfred's biographer Asser, who we spoke about earlier, documented that King Alfred suffered for most of his life with chronic and severe abdominal pain. In order to begin the detective trail, we must start in the city of Winchester in the county of Hampshire at the southern part of England itself. It is Winchester that Alfred chose as his seat of power and was the ancient capital of Wessex and England itself. Other places have claimed to be the capital of Wessex at various points in time. The rural town of Somerton in Somerset boldly claims to be the ancient capital of Wessex. Indeed, as you approach Somerton, you'll see the signs that let you know you're about to enter the ancient marketplace town, and they make it very clear where the capital of ancient Wessex once stood. It may well be that various kings of Wessex have passed through Somerton or resided here for some amount of time at various points through history, but the contemporary written evidence of Alfred's time is clear that Winchester was the royal capital. And as the royal capital, it is here that King Alfred was laid to rest in the Anglo-Saxon cathedral known as the Old Minster. Alfred's son, Edward the Elder, moved his remains to the New Minster in 904 AD. It is in the New Minster that Edward, his brother, son and grandson were all buried. Truly a final resting place of an Anglo-Saxon dynasty. However, in the year 1110, the New Minster was moved to Hyde and became Hyde Abbey. Hyde Abbey, a medieval monastery, was located just outside the northern walls of Winchester. For the second time, the royal burials, including that of Alfred the Great, were moved and interred at Hyde Abbey. That would be the end of the story, but for the actions of King Henry VIII in the 16th century, actions that were to prove catastrophic for the monasteries and religious houses in Britain. If you're interested to learn any more about the dissolution of the monasteries and the actions of Henry VIII, have a listen to episode 3 of our podcast for a detailed rundown on how Henry VIII changed the shape of Britain forever. In 1539, there was no clemency for Hyde Abbey, and it was destroyed by Henry's henchmen. The skeletal remains of Alfred and his relations, though, were left in situ. That is, though, until the year 1788, where a workhouse and prison was built on the site of Hyde Abbey. An eyewitness reported seeing the tombs emptied and the remains thrown about with little care. Clearly, the people here had little regard for the Anglo-Saxon kings and the legacy that accompanied them. These actions are really hard to comprehend, but the damage was really done at this point. In 1866, an antiquarian called John Mellor claimed to have excavated the bones of the Wessex royal household from the site of Hyde Abbey. He sold the bones to the rector William Williams of St. Bartholomew's Church in Hyde, who reinterred them in an unmarked grave in the late 19th century, without any pomp and ceremony afforded to great kings. And so we must fast forward all the way to the 21st century and the year 2013, where a research group working with St. Bartholomew's Church petitioned Winchester Diocese to allow them to exhume the remains of the so-called unmarked grave. Archaeologists from the University of Winchester, led by osteoarchaeologist Dr. Katie Tucker, exhumed the remains in March 2013 and found bones from 6 or more individuals. Radiocarbon dates revealed that the skeletons from the unmarked grave dated from about 1100 to 1500 AD. These could not be the bones of King Alfred the Great or the Anglo-Saxon royal dynasty. They're much, much too late. So the question that remained was, where were the remains of King Alfred and the rest of the Wessex royal family? As part of the ongoing research by Dr. Tucker and her team, she contacted Winchester Museum Service and inquired about a community excavation that took place on the site of Hyde Abbey in the late 1990s. This led to a really unexpected development. Dr. Tucker and her team found a fragment of a pelvic bone that had been found at the site of Hyde Abbey's high altar, and radiocarbon dating by the University of Oxford showed that it had a date range of between AD 895 and the year 1017. This fell within the date range of when King Alfred died. Osteological analysis of the bones, found that they also belonged to a man between 26 and about 45 years old at death. There was no Anglo-Saxon cemetery on the site of the abbey, and the most plausible explanation is that the pelvic bone must belong to King Alfred, Edward the Elder, or Ethelweard, the brother of Edward. But, most importantly, as only King Alfred and Edward the Elder would have been buried at the high altar, they are the most likely candidates. It is because of the technological advancement of science in recent years that we're even able to get to this point at all. But it is a great shame that we just cannot pinpoint the skeletal remains of Alfred and give him a proper burial once and for all, one that he surely deserves. One final thing that I wanted to mention in this podcast episode was that if you ever find yourself in Somerset, go and stand on top of Borough Mump, or indeed on the Isle of Athelney itself. Both can be visited free of charge. And of course the Isle of Athelney is the site of Alfred's great monastery. And go there and look out across the vast flat expanse of the Somerset Levels. Even better, do this early in the morning on an autumn day when the mist clings to the lowland landscape and it gives the impression of a sprawling and eerie boggy marshy sea. Just imagine Alfred the Great stood on the very same spot as you over 1,000 years earlier. It is in these moments of reflection that time seems to blur and history really comes alive. The world of Alfred the Great and the great Viking hordes are not very far away at all. Thanks for listening, and be sure to check out our blog at themysteriesofhistory.com and social media outlets where we'll post extra info and images for each episode. So until next week, stay curious. The mysteries of history remain.